Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started on time, which is not a usual thing for me, but I'm here to change. So thank you so much for being here. I'm going to start by saying that I'm a little nervous. I'm like stupidly nervous. The first time being all in person again in a couple of years. So I just want to get that out of the way. But I'm also very excited to talk to you about a project that was funded by a TIG that we branded as What's Next Text. So this panel is Lessons Learned from What's Next Text, Outcomes and Trouble Spots for Michigan Legal Help Visitors. My name is Angela Tripp. I'm the director of the Michigan Legal Help Program, which is Michigan's statewide self-help website and affiliated self-help centers. I have with me two of my wonderful staff. I have to also plug that most of my team is here at the conference, so I'm very excited that they could all come and take advantage of all the great learning and meeting folks. In the middle here is Wilson Soprapto. He is our web developer, and he's going to talk a lot about the technical aspects of What's Next Text. And Kim Kramer on the end is one of our wonderful staff attorneys, and she was very involved in this project over the last couple of years. So I also cannot forget to say that Susan Bales, our data and program analyst, all of the slides in this presentation that are beautiful and useful were made by her. I know that Kim and I made a few other ones, but Susan put together some really great data slides, so I want to make sure that she gets credit for that. We started this project in, let's see, it's a 20 TIG, so we started it in 2021. It's a 19 TIG. It's a 2019 TIG, and we started it in 2020. So, a lot of programs are doing, or not a lot, but a handful of programs are doing these text-based systems to try to learn more about people's outcomes after they get brief advice or brief service or advice from a legal aid program. We wanted to do it from the perspective of people who visited Michigan Legal Help, and so that was our focus. And one of the reasons that I think we're all doing this is because there is, continual, I'm going to call it pressure, maybe pressure is too strong of a word, but pressure on our sector to prove our impact through outcomes. And so it's really hard to prove impact of self-help without a lot of tracking. And so this was one of the ways that we are trying to do that. But first, I want to give you a chance to try it. So if you, I wanted to get a little bit of the experience, you can take your phones out and text WNT23, What's Next Text 23, to this number, 248-453-1711. You'll just get a very short glimpse of What's Next Text. And I want to thank Wilson for programming this little fun text to give you all an example of what we're talking about. While you're doing that, I'll give you a short roadmap of what we're going to cover today. We're going to do a high-level overview of the project, and then we're going to get into the technical aspects, and then do an overview of the data, and then a deeper dive into the data analysis, and what we have learned from our first few months of data. Hopefully you got your return text. It's a short text flow, but that's the idea. You send a text message, you get an automated response based on what option you select. So as I mentioned, this is a project that was funded by a TIG. It has a companion TIG that we're hoping to launch in the next few weeks, where we are doing that second half related to finding out more about outcomes from people who got advice and brief service from legal services attorneys. So there's kind of two companion projects with similar goals and objectives, but different audiences. And so these were our official TIG goals and objectives. But the thing that I want to highlight is that we had two goals. One was to provide helpful, just-in-time information to people during the course of their legal problem. So not just when they visit the website, but over the next weeks and months as they're handling their legal problem. The second objective was to get information about outcomes. At different places we would ask, did you file your paperwork? Did you serve your paperwork? Did you get evicted? Did you get divorced? Did you complete and execute your power of attorney? So trying to find out, did they do the things that they came to our website to learn more about? one of the major learnings that we had was that those two goals often worked against one another, and in interesting ways, and it's hard to do both of those things at the same time. Just some of our accomplishments we did, again, coming from our final evaluation report, we used Twilio Studio to do the texting, to programming the text flows, and then we used Cloud Firestore for the data collection and analysis. Wilson will talk about that because clearly I know nothing. And then we created and launched 8 of our What's Next text flows in the following subject areas. So creating a healthcare power of attorney, answering an eviction, objecting to a garnishment, applying to change child support, applying for a small claims case, filing an answer to divorce without children, being a plaintiff in a divorce without children, and being a petitioner to get a personal protection order, which is our domestic violence abuse orders. So those were the subjects that we covered. And I'm going to turn it over to Wilson to talk about the technical background.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. We basically, on our software, we use 3 different kind of software. We use Twilio Studio, where we can Twilio Studio give us some flexibility to write a text. Google Firebase, and also a read tool. I will explain each of them more. Twilio Studio, I give a link to the product overview for Twilio Studio here. But also would like to mention is on the screenshot, you will see how this Twilio text flow structure. It's connecting with the widget, and based on the answer, and we can link it to another widget, and then the user will be able to get a proper response. In Twilio Studio, we call it flow, and also lately, about a year and a half ago, they added what they call subflow. So for a few of our text flow, it can get quite complicated and large, and when the text flow become too complicated, it's easier to manage by breaking them up. This is where the subflow allow us to do that. On the lower part of it, you can see that kind of gray area where the subflow, how it tied together. Twilio Studio also support JSON data. We can build Twilio Studio with the widget, and for editing purposes, sometimes it's much better or easier for me to export the flow definition in a JSON format and then modify them with the text editor, and we save them, we import them. Twilio Studio also support what they call liquid template language. It's basically, it can allow us to get information or dynamic content. For example, we would like to know who is the phone number of the user, and that change each user. So in order to get that, we use liquid template language. That is also supported by Twilio. Function is a lightweight serverless piece of the code that run in a Twilio cloud. It's almost similar like JavaScript that is supported by Twilio, but they have their own serverless, so it's easier to integrate between the function and the text flow. Firebase, as Ange mentioned, we also use Firebase. It's an app development platform that Google has. It allows us to write a custom apps. So for this particular project, we actually have independent contractor named Scott Friday. Many of you probably know him. He wrote these apps for us that can integrate between Twilio API and also use some of the function with the Firebase to trigger the automatic running and also to store some of the data. The data is stored the Cloud Firestore database is part of the Cloud Firestore database is part of the Google Firebase, and it's actually a NoSQL cloud database, so it doesn't store the data in column or fields. They call it differently, and it's allow us to store the text messages from the Twilio in a JSON format that we will eventually be able to run a custom report. For us to do a custom report, we tap into an app called Retool. It's to build internal tool on top of the Firebase data, so it allows us to connect to our account in the database. Then we can write some JavaScript to generate a custom report. When we get a text message stored in our database, it's all in JSON format, then we custom write the query so it break it down. When the report is exported, it become in column CVS format, so we will be able to run some data for analysis later. For this, I'll hand over to Anne. Thank you.
Thank you, Wilson. I just am always, my appreciation of Wilson is renewed every time he does a presentation like this. I just said, I want to build can you build a thing that works like this? And he goes off and does it, and then he can tell other people how to do it. So thank you, Wilson. People are always interested in what things cost, and so I put this slide in here. We had some contractor costs of $11,000. Michigan Legal Help staff time, this is just based on our hours and salaries. And I will say that initially we thought we would hire a contractor to build the flows in Twilio, but then it turned out that Wilson could just do it. And so that's why there's less in the contractor line and more in the staff line. Our Twilio costs were pretty minimal. That's why we all love Twilio. And then, of course, we have indirect admin costs, including cost of coming to this conference. And so the whole project was about $75,000 for those who are interested. The rest of the time, we're going to be talking about data. We've done other presentations kind of on, like how we decided to do things, but this presentation today is really on what we have learned. So talking about the data, how we collected it, how we organized it, how we analyzed it, and what we learned. Specifically, we wanted to talk about the hypotheses that we had, kind of the gut feelings that we had after 10 years of doing Michigan Legal Help, and what the data supported there, things that we did not expect, and what we hope to do with that new information, and then our biggest struggles and lessons. And then we're going to talk a little bit at the end about our next steps, and take questions. I will say something that I wish we had done that we were not able to do is to have a data person involved from the very beginning of the project. So that was one of my big lessons, is that if you have a data person on the front end, it makes it a lot easier to analyze the data on the back end because you've been thoughtful about what you're collecting and how you're collecting it and how you're formatting it. So that's a tip from the middle of the presentation. So again, this was a TIG. These were our evaluation data and methodologies. We wanted to track the number of people engaging in What's Next text. It sounds easy, right? But there's a number of different ways that you can look at that. One of the other things that we learned is that it's hard to define these data points and determine exactly how to collect them. And that's why it would have been good to have that data person, a professional, knowledgeable, skilled data person from the beginning. We looked at the rates of enrollment in different text flows, like how many people who saw the option to opt in versus how many people did. The the number of people responding to messages indicating that they needed additional help. So in the text flows, as you saw, some of the questions, like you had several options, and some of the options in our text flows are, I need more help with this. So it's like a clear indicator of a place where self-represented litigants need more assistance. We had different response rates for different flows. We looked at the length of time people engaged in different flows, and the number of people indicating specific outcomes through their text responses, and what those outcomes were and what information we can derive from that. We had some qualitative data as well, feedback from usability testing. There's also, at the end of every What's Next text flow is a 5-point Likert scale of what you thought of it. And then we spent a lot of time talking amongst ourselves about lessons learned throughout the project. I will add that it's very important to do usability testing in a project like this because, my staff drafted the text flows on paper and Wilson built them, and then it's only once you have your phone in your hands and you're answering the questions and seeing where you get kicked out that you really understand what the experience is like. We did the usability testing on ourselves first because it was the pandemic and we didn't have a lot of other people. And the staff said that the vibe that they got from the messages really changed how they drafted the questions and where they ended the text flows. Like, there were times where we asked a question like, did you go to your eviction hearing? And if the answer was no, we were like, okay, thanks for engaging with us. And we were like, no, we can't end it there. That's not okay. And it, on paper, it's like, oh, well, that's one outcome. But when you're the real person getting that, you're like, no, we need to do some follow-up here. So we really learned a lot from the usability testing. And I know we say it all the time, but it never hurts to repeat it. Usability testing is very critical. So looking at some of those data points, our engagement, this definition of engagement is how many people completed the text flows versus how many abandoned or dropped out. I want to give a caveat. So we launched our flows over 2022. 3 in the first quarter, 2 in the second quarter, 4 in the third quarter. And so the data that we're talking about today is only that third quarter 2022 data, because that was the only quarter that had all of our text flows live. I wish we could have done fourth quarter 22 data, but that's a lot to ask of a data person to spend, it's only the 19th, right, to spend the first 4 days of the year doing a really deep dive into data. So the data is just one quarter. We did a lot of learning in the other quarters. We looked at the stats as they were coming in, but the data that we're showing today is just that, primarily that third quarter data. There's some data that is the full year, or the first 3 quarters, but I'll just stop there. So 36% of people who started a What's Next text flow either finished it or were still engaged in it as of the end of the third quarter of 2022. I wasn't sure what to compare that to. I was disappointed, but my staff, as we talked about it more, were like, well, if you think about paper surveys, 36% is a really great response rate. And then when you think about some of our text flows are meant to go on for months, it's a great response rate. So, and we'll talk about analysis later. I have to remind myself, I'm just showing the numbers. Kim is going to talk about some more of the analysis. So 36% of people who started it stuck with it. And then we also realized it's really hard to calculate the rates of engagement of the uptake numbers, like how many people saw the ad for What's Next text and engaged, because we put it in many different places over the website and on our DIY tools. It's really hard to gauge how many people saw those. So we really don't have a good number for how many people chose to engage in this project at all. So this, did I not promise you beautiful data slides? I just want to have a moment to appreciate that. So length of engagement is also interesting. So how many days did our text conversations last? And if you look at the one that's sort of highlighted here with the icon is the eviction text flow. So the average number of days to complete was 30. The maximum, someone spent 69 days in that flow, and the minimum was 3 days. So some people finished in 3, some people finished in 69, but the average was 30. And if you look, different text flows, these are the three takeaways that I have from this chart is people will hang in there for a while. That divorce without minor children, it's near the 150-day mark. But divorce without minor children takes a long time. So if we're following you through the process, it is going to take, up to a minimum of 60 days. And people will hang with us if they're interested. But most flows averaged about 1 month in duration. So those dots showing you the averages are all very similar. And then the obvious different flows have different time frames, which totally makes sense considering the subjects and how long different legal problems take to finalize. These are some satisfaction rates. We picked the 2 flows that had the most participants. Again, this is just 1 quarter of data, and very early on, I wished we had years of data to analyze, but I'll come back in a year or 2 and do that. So eviction, average rating, how did they find this experience? 2.5 stars. Divorce without minor children, a little over 4.5. Kim will talk more about this in the next section, so I'll leave it at different flows have different satisfaction rates, and we can learn from that. This slide also compares the length of time people engaged in the two flows. So these gray bars are the eviction timelines, and the blue is divorce, and the means are here with these lines. So again, interesting things to think about, and we'll talk more about this a little bit later. This is the overall satisfaction of all the people who were invited to rate the experience in this third quarter. The overall rating was 3.8. I had a lot of feelings about this, but that is not what is important. What is important is what we can learn from this information, and Kim's going to talk about this in the next section. But overall, 3.8. And the rating scale was, 1 to 5, poor to excellent. I mentioned earlier that our project had 2 purposes, and I kind of want to show that to you. The first was to gather information about our users' experiences from their answers to some of our questions. So we did this in 2 ways. We asked questions that indicate when people needed more help. An example is someone telling us that they need more help to file an answer, or they need help finding a lawyer. Or the second type of question that we focused on were we asked visitors to share an action that they took or an outcome that they had. So telling us that they did file an answer in court, telling us that they did finalize their divorce, telling us that they reached a settlement with their landlord and they're not having to move. So most text flows included both types of these questions, help-seeking and outcome action. And you can see, 2 examples of the help-seeking questions. And my next slide will show some of the outcome action ones. But 16% of, this is just another example from the eviction flow, 16% of responses in the eviction text flow were people seeking more help. And again, Kim's going to do a deeper dive into that. Again, ugly slide, I made this one. So these are just some more of the examples of the questions that we use to solicit information about actions or outcomes. Like, did you file an answer with the court in your eviction case? If you went to court in your eviction case, what was the outcome? And we put kind of like 4 common outcomes, and then an outcome of I don't know. And then the last example is answer to divorce without children. Have you had the final hearing? 3 options. And so again, just trying to track what happens to people who use Michigan Legal Help to try to solve their legal problems. And now I'm going to pass it on to Kim to do the interesting bits.
Thank you, Ange. So this is back to this same slide you saw before that has some data from our 2 most used text flows, eviction and divorce without children. And Susan Bales put this together, and I love these 2 text flows together because on average, people engaged with both of them for about 30 days. So there was enough there that people were coming back. Like the level of engagement was the same. But people's rating of how they found this experience was starkly different. People loved the divorce text flow. That average rating of 4.62 and an average of 4.62, I think that's really incredible that this is an automated system. We drafted a text flow, Wilson programmed it into Twilio, and it set it and forget it. Someone signs up and they just get automated messages about how to move their case forward and what's been happening in their case. And then, the eviction people were just like, yeah, this didn't help me. I really didn't like it. And obviously this is still early. There's not a huge amount of data, but when we started to look at this, and especially since we have another texting project coming up, we're thinking about what can we learn from this. These are two very different case types, two very different outcomes. What did we learn? And at first we talked about it in terms of plaintiffs and petitioners. Many people who are coming to us for divorce are the filer. They're the one responsible for moving the case forward. And in an eviction, people are the defendants. They're being evicted. It doesn't work as well there. But I think that's part of it. My current hypothesis is that it is more about cases where information is going to help someone are good for texting. So the divorce is that. People come to us about divorce all the time, like I filed these papers, what do I do next? I'm so confused, something about a default, what do I need to do? And so to get someone to the finish line in a divorce, they need information. They need to know, what form do I file next? How do I not get the case get dismissed for lack of progress? And a text flow can give that to someone. In an eviction, especially when they're coming for self-help, they've maybe called legal aid and been told, sorry, we can't represent on this case. So a lot of the people who end up on Michigan Legal Help for an eviction maybe have a non-payment of rent case with no defenses, and there's just not a lot a text message can do. We do give people referrals for help finding a lawyer, but probably a lot of those people meet that text with like, great, I just got off the phone with them, and now you're texting me to call again. So Ange talked earlier about these kind of two competing goals of giving people just-in-time legal information to help move the case forward, and also gathering outcomes from people. And going forward, figuring out which one of those to prioritize in a text flow, I think is important to consider in the type of case. So if I were doing this again, in an eviction case, I may present it to the visitor as more of a, would you be willing to answer one or two questions about how your case went? It will help us help other people better. And that's sort of what they get. The thing they get out of it is, I can help out someone else, I can give some information and say how my case went. And we don't give this sort of, in some cases maybe it's added frustration of, oh my God, I engaged with this for 30 days and I still got evicted. And in a different kind of case, other cases that are more similar to a divorce where information can help the person get to the finish line, those are the cases where we think more about giving some more detailed information to help someone through procedural steps. Another thing we found was that harder processes lead to higher abandonment rates, and not harder processes as in like procedurally complex. Divorces are pretty procedurally complex and people tend to like that and get through, but for child support motions, for example, lots of people want to pay less child support. Lots of people want to get more child support, but the universe of people who are eligible to do that legal process is much smaller than the amount of people who come to us looking for that. And so although that may be a popular legal topic on our website, it's not necessarily a good one for a text flow because so many people just immediately find out they're not eligible for it. So our other piece of caution here is not to just look for popular topics, but look for topics that people can realistically get through reasonably frequently. And I think this one's you.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. One of the other sort of lessons that we learned kind of very similar to what Kim was saying, that the texting project that we did is not great in cases that are not great self-represented litigant cases. And so this slide is showing how many people responded to text messages saying that they needed more help. And you can see eviction, just by a giant margin, people were just telling us, no, I need more help. I need more help filing an answer. I need help finding an attorney. I need help prepping for my hearing. I just need more help. And again, like, that's not what a text message can do. And I think back to the plenary, when Everett talked about, when you see a giant problem, know what you can do and know what you really can't do. And a text message program isn't really going to help prevent someone being evicted if there are no resources out there to stop that eviction, a lawyer to raise defenses that exist, or money that can help them not be evicted. During the time of COVID, when there was all of the rental assistance, our text flows were probably even more useful. Like the data now and in the future will probably be even more stark, because at least during COVID we could say, hey, here's the number for your HARA, go to them and get some money. We don't even have that anymore. And so, if the case is just one where it's not a great type of litigation for self-represented litigants, it might not be a great text message project. And I think Kim said it best. But again, like, maybe this is something that we take back and say, like, listen, we need to focus more of our full representation cases on eviction, which is not to say that particularly Michigan hasn't done everything that they can. But it's one of the lessons that we can take. We had hoped for more detailed data, like at what steps or stages of the eviction process do people struggle. But that data is actually pretty hard to drill down into, and we haven't taken the time to do that analysis. And so this overview of just how many people were seeking help was one that we wanted to share with you. So I'm going to talk about some of our biggest surprises. So the first was the rates of engagement. Again, compared to what, right? I was like worried that we had an overall low rate of engagement. And you always want to have more people use the products that you're creating. And so one of the things that we talked a lot about was how we could modify the text flows to get more people to engage. And Kim touched on that, about thinking about which of these two goals are we going to really pursue with this individual text flow. And also, my staff told me over and over that I was probably being a little too hard on us, that we had pretty decent rates of engagement. This is a totally new product, and the data does show that every quarter we had more people signing up, more people finishing, and so the overall trend is in the right direction. Again, the challenges of balancing the two goals of the project. We struggled a lot about this. We felt selfish texting people just to get outcomes. But as Kim said, in some cases that might really be the best thing. But if you decide that you want to just get outcomes, it has to be short and sweet. The longer text flows need to, they need to have a real benefit to the person on the other end in order for them to keep engaging. And it's sort of it's like a microcosm of the challenge of all legal information work. We want to build something simple enough to be useful that covers most common fact patterns, but when you do that, it becomes really long. And so the length of the text flows was something else that we went back and forth about. Like in the divorce flows, initially we were like, we need to put every possible step in there, and then we were like, this text flow is going to cost $1 million to build, and no one's ever going to finish it. And so, finding the sweetest spot we could find between being helpful and useful and detailed, but still not overwhelming people with information. To get outcomes, we have to ask more questions and take more of people's times. The longer the flows are, the more people drop off. So, how do you balance those two things? Where do you find that place where you get the information that you want in a short enough time that people will give it to you? What goal do you sacrifice? What outcomes do you sacrifice? And it's like, again, that planning in the beginning, is really important, but also the agility to change. Like, the last text flow that we did was radically different from the prior ones because we were applying some of the lessons that we learned from the early ones. The third, I don't know that this really counts as a big surprise, but it was something that we thought a lot about. There are better ways to get outcome information. And we're exploring these. But when, the more we talked about it, like self-reporting is not necessarily very accurate. I mean, how many times do you lie when your doctors ask you questions? Like people are hardwired to make themselves look good and say, well, of course I went to court. Why? I wouldn't miss court. But also they may not understand what happened. So texting to find out what happened to people is maybe not the best method because it might not be accurate. And engagement rates are low. Our numbers are low, and if when we did try to do the math on how many people who saw the ad actually engaged in it, it was like 3%. So 3% of people engage, 68% of those people drop out. So like, what is this N? What can we say? We're not really learning outcomes. We're not really learning something useful about outcomes. We can't say that like people in Michigan getting divorced do this with these kinds of numbers. And so, there are probably other better ways to get outcomes data if that's really what you're looking at. And that's through data sharing, that's through, tracking cases in the courts. There's a lot of cool things that you can do with outcomes, but if you're looking for like systemic information about outcomes, probably not the best method. I'm sorry. So looking at those outcome measures, so of the different flows that we had, and again, I'm noticing that these slides are from the launch of each individual flow to the end, so this is a little bit more longitudinal information. 29% of people engaging in the changing a child support order text flow gave us outcome information. Going down to eviction, 85% of those people gave us some information about their outcomes. For a project that was trying to get outcomes information, it's really hard to do. So this is the data showing that. Is this you, Kim?
I think this is just an example
Okay.
of some of the outcomes from eviction, because this was the highest rate of giving us an outcome.
Okay.
This is like drilling down to that one. You can talk about it.
Okay, all right. Sorry. So looking at that eviction flow, which had the most opportunity to collect outcomes, again, very few were actually collected, and what can we learn from them? So the first one, have you used our DIY eviction tool to complete your answer? Well, we learned that 2/3 of people did not. Did you go to court? 24 people did, 17 did not, 29 were still waiting. It's interesting information, but it's hard to know exactly what to do with that. We know that there are problems, that people don't file answers, people don't go to court. I don't think there's anything terribly illuminating about this information. And then, 6 people told us the actual outcome of their case, that their landlord and they settled and the case was dismissed. And so, this again, the reliability of this is not great. People, don't always understand what's happening. I already said all this stuff last slide, sorry. We are working on a project in Michigan where we're hoping to do data sharing between legal aid programs and courts to get anonymized data on the outcomes of people who are represented by legal aid versus those who went to legal aid to get advice only, and versus those who have had no interaction whatsoever with legal aid. And this to us seems like a better way to look at the big picture of, what is the impact of advice and brief service on eviction. So, there are other options too. When litigants are in courts, the courts could ask them if they engaged in self-help resources. If we could integrate our, DIY tools with e-filing and court management data, we might be able to do a little bit more effective tracking of outcomes on the impact of self-help resources on people's eventual outcomes. One of the things I'd love for you to think about for the question and answer section is if there are other things that we have talked about that surprised you, or things that you've learned in your own texting projects that have surprised you. And we'll save that for a conversation at the end, but I just wanted to point that out now. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Kim.
So this is back to another slide that you've seen before, but we're going to dive into it a little bit more to help talk about some of our biggest struggles and lessons. So this is our engagement data to date, and that 36% of people, this is showing that 36% of people who signed up for What's Next Text are either completed the text flow or are still engaged, and it's just not finished yet. And when we first looked at this data, we panicked because our engagement number was 8%. And I guess going into a bit of a later lesson, not having a data person involved from the start, we asked Wilson to tell us how many people had completed their flows, and he did, and we didn't consider that we designed these flows to take months, and so there were a good number of people when we were looking at data initially who just were still engaged, because divorces take 2 months at the short end, and now like exponentially longer than that. And so I guess one that's partially a data lesson. We also did, when we saw the 8%, started thinking about what can we do to increase engagement, because there's all this, it seemed to us that there was a lot of drop off. And so we did, as an experiment, create a new text flow for personal protection orders that was really intentionally designed to be very quick. Were you able to complete the form? Were you able to file it in court? Did you get your protective order? And so even though it seems like that may have been driven by some panic that wasn't quite warranted, it's an example in projects like this that it's important to look at data early, to iterate, to just put something together. We tested it, we user tested it, not to just throw it together and put it out there, but to try something new and see how it works compared to your other benchmarks. And that PPO text flow hasn't been out for as long, so we don't have great numbers on it, but the early numbers are looking like people do have pretty good engagement on it. Let me move to the next slide. So I will say for the millionth time, getting a data person involved early would have been so useful. We now have Susan Bales on our team who has been able to think of questions that we didn't think to ask, and has been able to, shockingly, she can find things that I couldn't just find on Google. And so she has been really instrumental in taking what we have and helping us to think about how to build it better, thinking about different things to throw in and experiment with. You know, would we get better engagement with a video? So that is something we would definitely recommend. Also, narrowing down what outcomes we really wanted to know about, and not asking questions just because you're curious. So as we were drafting the text flows, we shared them with each other, and one thing we would try to flag for each other is like, why are you asking this? What are you going to do with this information? Do you think it would be just like an interesting stat to throw into a report, or is this something that you actually can use to change your behavior as an organization to serve visitors, clients more effectively? And as Ange mentioned earlier, also thinking about whether there's a better way to get the data. When you have this sort of tunnel vision of drafting a text and you think, oh yeah, that would be great information to have, but is texting the best way to get it is really important. You know, can you just use a court register of actions to look this kind of stuff up? Can you ask your local case handling organization if they can hand over data to you? So try to think outside of just the text messaging and think about whether the text message is the best way to gather. We also talked earlier about balancing between main goals, either giving guidance, giving people help in completing their process versus getting outcomes. And the lesson we learned here is to be really intentional about which flows are heavy on instructions and which flows just gather information. Part of this also depends on what your role is as an organization. So the people who engaged with this process were all visitors to Michigan Legal Help. They're all self-represented litigants who either chose not to call a lawyer or maybe called legal aid and couldn't get full representation. And so in these flows, we do think that in some areas it is important to give people more step-by-step information, more procedural information, because they haven't been handed off by a legal aid lawyer. They haven't necessarily gotten really detailed advice specific to their case. We mentioned earlier that we're working on a second version of this project where Michigan Legal Help is working in partnership with the direct service providers in Michigan to roll out a texting project. And in that situation, we're really thinking more about gathering outcomes because they've gotten a ton of information from the legal aid lawyer, they've gotten legal advice, and so in that situation, maybe it's better to just gather some quick outcomes. And we throw in a reminder about make sure you serve the other person, but it's a bit less important there to give step-by-step guidance. And then finally, and probably the most challenging, is to make less complicated text flows. The staff attorneys at Michigan Legal Help were the drafters of these text flows, and it's so hard not to put everything in there and try to get into the weeds. And you're putting the question options, and you think of, well, maybe this won't fit this one person, so we should add a question to fit everyone. And when you're writing an automated text message, you're just not going to hit every single weedsy situation that someone might run into. And so we really relied on taking those people and really guiding them towards finding a lawyer, and tried to cover the most common types of outcomes, the most common types of situations, but not worrying about getting into every possible permutation of how a divorce, how an eviction could happen. Also related to the complication and how much information to give, we found ourselves really duplicating some of the information on our website in a text flow. And giving long, complicated procedural instructions in a text message, like when you get that on your phone, it's overwhelming. Having to scroll up a few times to get to the beginning of this text message to tell me what I have to do next in my case, I'm like, I can't do that. And so instead, we really leaned heavily on linking people out to our website. So the Michigan Legal Help website has procedural instructions on it, and we would send a text message that said something like, you have X amount of days to serve the other party. If you need information about how to do this, here's a link. And that's much more manageable. That way people who've already done it don't get overwhelmed with a text message giving all of the steps. So as much as you can, lean on resources that already exist in your area. But in living within the limits of legal information and within the bounds of doing this by text message is hard. It's a really different kind of writing. It takes some practice.
Are these slides that I should have been flipping through while you were talking? So these slides are just for folks looking at the materials, kind of covering what Kim talked about in terms of planning and budgeting, text flow length, text flow complexity. I don't really have any tips on planning and budgeting for this kind of project. I will say this, that the text flows took a lot of effort to build. I think one of the flows that Wilson did took 40 hours to build. So that's also why you do usability testing early and often, so that you don't have someone spend 40 hours building something and then say, oh, we're going to change it all around. So,
and that was just Wilson building it, right? That wasn't
yes.
The drafting time was other than that. And
yes.
The drafting time was also
yes,
nothing.
Just the act of putting it into Twilio. And then Kim talked about flow length and complexity. This is just, again, more slides to cover those topics. So some of our future steps that we want to do with this project, again, time. We need more time to get more data, to do more analysis, and particularly if we, new flows that we're building now, that we're building with this knowledge of how to do it better, we're, interested to get those new ones live and compare the data to the old ones. Thinking, our second project where we're doing this with legal aid programs, one of the other things that strikes me why texting for outcomes is better suited for legal aid programs is because they have a more controlled universe. Like the people that they're communicating with are people that they know they gave legal advice to in perhaps brief service. RN is just anyone with a legal problem in Michigan. And so our universe, it's easy to say like, we gave legal advice to 47 people about eviction, and of them, 35 got evicted. Like that's useful information, but for us to say, well, 50,000 people came looking for information about eviction, and we know that 6 of them didn't get evicted. Like, that's not meaningful. But in another context, it is more meaningful when you can kind of control that N. And so I think in terms of, projects like Michigan Legal Help, one of the lessons is that this is good as one piece of the data collection, but you can't rely on this to get widespread outcomes information. It is really helpful for conveying procedural assistance, behavioral nudges, just-in-time information, whatever you want to call it. This text is a really good medium for that, and people did like it when that was the primary purpose. We don't know if it's been good at identifying common trouble spots for self-represented litigants, in particular legal processes. We haven't really, analyzing that data is really complicated because we have to look at individual questions, where people dropped off, where they were in the process. And so this may also not be a great way to collect that data just because it's really hard to analyze that data. Another year of data will help us determine how to increase our engagement rates and keep people engaged till the end and get them to take the survey. We're also doing literature reviews around other ways to use texting to increase engagement. And so as we have more lessons that we learn, we will share them with the community. I do have, I brought it with me in case there are questions. Like our TIG evaluation report, we put a lot of time and energy into this. So if you're considering a similar project, you can learn a lot about what we did and why and what we thought about it. We're also very happy to talk to anyone with similar projects. So we have a good amount of time left for questions. So I hope people have questions, so we'd happy to answer questions. We're happy to hear your thoughts on what we talked about today. If you have other hypotheses for why we saw the data we did, we would love to hear those. If you have your own data analysis from texting projects, I would absolutely love to hear more about that. This is just like one piece of this, universe of texting projects.
Hi. Hi. Just wanted to start with congratulations. We all have legal help information online, passive, static, and you've gone outreach with it, so thumbs up on that, and just a massive deficiency in outcomes data within our space. So 2 objectives competing as they may be. Congratulations, great to see. I'm most curious about the enrollment, if you will, so the 3% opt-in. Any lessons learned to how to get that to 10% or whatever magical number you think it could grow to? Because I think that's the part that would most interest me. And just one comment on when you say engagement, I think you also want to say it's active engagements or it's usership versus just engagement, because I think that 3% is your actual engagement number.
That's a very good point. Thank you. We didn't spend a lot of time talking about that or thinking about that.
I actually just had a conversation with someone about this morning.
Oh, excellent.
Over eggs and fruit. Right, the number is hard, Ange mentioned, because we can't say how many people saw the advertisement for What's Next Text, because we have our page views, we have how many people completed our tools, but the same person may have gone through our guide to legal help and they saw the enrollment information there, and then maybe they completed the answer to eviction and so they saw it there. So there's a lot of double counting going on. So it's hard to say, but it is, we know how many people go to Michigan Legal Help each day. It's a lot. We know how many people enroll in What's Next Text. It's not that much. And one possible way to increase this, and we're kind of getting there with our Next Texting project, is that there's not like a button to push and enroll. So the advertisement is similar to what you saw. Text this thing to this number to enroll. And most of our website users are on mobile, so they're not on a laptop and having their phone right here to text. And so if you're on the website scrolling and then you have to go into your text messages and say, oh, what was that number? And then go back to the tab. What was the final digit? Back and forth again. And I think that's maybe too much work, and people might just say, oh, I'll come back to this page later if I have questions. So thinking about a way to be able to push it out and write on the website, say, what's your number? Do you want to enroll in texting on this? Could increase engagement. We haven't experimented with that. And then if you're a direct services office, we do have a way, we use now Justice Server, that we can push text messages out to people. So after you've gotten advice on an eviction case, you just, they say, can we text you about this? Get some follow-up. Sure, you push it out.
Just one other idea. I wondered if you thought of personifying the help in terms of the chat. So this is, Millie, Michigan Legal Help Information, whoever you decide to choose, but to give it a character so people are feeling assisted and not just kind of tech assisted.
That's a great idea, and I looked at Jack and laughed. What is your chat bot called? Moose, yes. Pine Tree Legal Aid did that very well, and their chat bot is called Moose. That's a great idea. Thank you. Thank you for carrying the mic around.
Thank you. Social psychologists will tell you that if you want to increase engagement or get increased compliance with what you'd like, give people something first. It doesn't even have to be a tremendous value either. You might have seen mailings where they mail you a shiny penny in an enticement for filling out something that they want you to do. And we all know the value of a penny is marginal, especially at this point, but the difference between sending that penny out and not sending the penny out is measurable. And if you can give someone, let's say, would you like a free pamphlet, we'll mail it to you, or I know, because you're engaging them on a sort of somewhat anonymous text. It's not in person, and it's not even a mailing where you can automatically give them something straight out of the gate. But if you can figure out a way to give them something, like I say, it doesn't have to be of a whole lot of value. A business card increases the rate of purchase for salespeople, or I'll get you a Coke from the fridge. You increase the rate of sales engagement. It could be small. That said, I wanted to ask you about the length of your text exchanges. Some surveys I've seen will tell the user, okay, you're on question 3 of 10. If you kind of give an indication, maybe that would help prompt people to continue, like only 2 more questions left, so that's not a big, or if you're questioning, how long is this thing going to be? I'm just going to abandon it. Maybe that would be of assistance to engagement as well.
That's an interesting idea, and I think we talked about that, but the challenge is that it's like a choose-your-own-adventure novel, and so the length can vary depending on, like, oh, you missed your hearing. Okay, now you've got to file a motion to set aside the default, and then you've got to have that hearing, and then you'll be back to here. And so I think that there are ways that we could do that with some of our text flows, or at least say, like, congratulations, you're halfway through with your divorce. Like, I think stuff like that would be that's a great idea. Do you guys want to add anything? Go ahead.
Hi, I'm David Johnson with Cleveland Legal Aid. So I had a couple thoughts where we had texting for outcomes as a legal services provider. But they relate with, I think, some of the points where you had raised here, where we incorporated some factors that could be considered nudges, like did you file the papers, did you go to court, things like that, where we're giving advice or pro se, assisted pro se. And it wasn't specifically analyzed, but a non-trivial number of people responded saying like, no, but this reminds me, or like, thanks for the reminder, which the cueing or nudging, where people gave actually a more descriptive response of how they received that text from us. And the to the ratings or the perceived helpfulness of what you're trying to do, I think there's an example, I think, along here where what the individual perceives as the problem and what you see as the problem from the legal standpoint can definitely differ. And that will really affect how they perceive the helpfulness or the quality of the service. And just the short example, I think, is we give a lot of advice around people who want to file bankruptcy. They have debts, but there's no garnishable income, there's no assets, there's nothing anyone can do to them legally about those debts. So our advice is you don't need a bankruptcy, there's no judgments, you can send a letter to the creditors stating this, and there is no legal problem to solve. But people may perceive that the problem is the debt, and we didn't do anything to help them with getting rid of the debts, and so that there can be a negative perception of how helpful that service was. But trying to tease out those things can be difficult. So.
That's great, and I appreciate you sharing those. Cleveland is, one of the leaders in the texting for outcomes, so we definitely learned a lot from your program, and so I appreciate you sharing those insights as well with everyone here.
Hi, I'm Nisha, Northeast New Jersey Legal Services. I'm just curious why you built the tool and didn't use a pre-existing bulk SMS tool or, texting group types of tools that are already on the market.
That's a good question. Do you want to answer it? Or do you want me to start?
Let me repeat the question. Is why do we not use existing tools available and we custom build it? Am I right?
Yeah, why did you custom build instead of using the bulk texting tools that already exist and that have flows built in? Like, what made you guys want to build it from scratch? What was different than what was already available in the market?
From technical standpoint, I can answer, but for purposes, engagement, probably Ange and Kim will add some more. It is because, first of all, we're focusing on the state of Michigan, so the situation and the person are different, and the information that we are providing on the website are different. So we have to, our text flow question has to follow what resources that we have that we can provide. So we cannot just take existing things and modify from there, and then they do not support this, they do not support that, because they just cannot do this. So we try to find something that are agile, that can be manageable for us to edit as well, because from the eviction tools, we have added it once, because at the time of pandemic, the rule changed. So we have to go back into the tax flow and make some changes. So with using whatever existing tools out there, we worry that this might not work for us.
And I think that at the time that we started building, it was 2019, and we looked at what we knew of the existing market products of OnBase, which is what Cleveland used, I think, and Twilio, and so picked between those two, and Twilio had their Twilio Studio that was really made for this kind of flowy building, and so we sort of did the hybrid of using the Twilio Studio and then putting our own content in there.
Hi. My question relates to building awareness for the fact that this great service exists. I wonder if you or anyone else in this room has ideas on how to do more broad, general awareness building in the public of Michigan. I know you put this on your website. Is there anything in addition to that you are contemplating for the future to grow that 278 users to a higher number?
Yes, and this is, again, a microcosm of a bigger problem that I think about all the time is that we have been somewhat lazy about PR, and we intended to do more kind of PR about this project, but then it was sort of like such a slow launch, and we never really, we put the advertisement in places where the people who would be best able to take advantage of it would see it. There's a lot more that we could do to publicize it. We didn't really do any big PR because it felt weird to be like, I don't know, I just am bad at PR, but we are working to get better at it, and we've in the new year, as part of a JFA, our Justice for All Commission, which is our Access to Justice Commission, is really looking at outreach more, and we are going to try to do more kind of systemic in-person outreach and outreach to community leaders and community navigators to try to, get them educated about the resources and tied into what we're doing to try to do more outreach that way. We rely a lot on courts and legal aid programs to refer people to us. We definitely could have done more targeted outreach on this. We just didn't for whatever millions of reasons that we don't do all the things that we could. But yes, I agree. It would be great to do more of that outreach.
Also, when you're starting a new product, you need like a little soft
Yes. Yes. We just kind of never got past the psychological soft launch.
We also, the text messages are aimed at Michigan Legal Help users. So if we put, a QR code in a court to access our divorce text flow, it wouldn't quite fit because we'd be asking questions about, you visited Michigan Legal Help today for your help with your divorce. Did you follow this instruction? So, it's all like we need. I almost think outreach on our own website, better indicators on our website to sort of drive our website traffic there, which is a weird niche of PR.
We're also in the middle of redesigning our website, and so it kind of got lost in that shuffle. But it's a good point. It is a kind of a very targeted audience, so it's a little bit tricky.
Hello, my name is Monique Keels. I'm from Community Legal Services of Mid-Florida. And my big question, when you guys were in the development and planning phase, did it ever come across your mind concerning any FCC related regulations or anything for opt-in and opting out of these text messages?
Yes, that is a great question. We did try to stay on the right side of the law. And so that's one of the reasons it's an opt-in. People have to decide to opt in. Our first message tells them, our first message says, this is an automated text message. You can opt out at any time by typing stop. And then there was something that happened with FCC. We had to do some special thing with Twilio.
There is changing on the texting requirement where we have to register as a nonprofit, register account, phone number, and to tell them what is this phone number and campaign used for, because they're starting to have spam, people receiving texting spam.
And I have just one comment. We're not using text just yet, but we use an interactive voice recognition survey at the end of our phone calls for our brief advice helpline. And so one of the open-end questions that we have in the end is how could we just better serve you in the future? And it allowed us to gain just sort of that free-range information to build in more services from our brief advice helpline perspective. A lot of people kept saying, if you could just write this motion for me, or if you could just do that. And so we try to incorporate that as just like low-hanging fruit in that way.
Okay, I have two more back here, and then I'm going to the front.
And I just want to show, this is kind of one of the examples of how we try to get people to opt in. This is, if you use the Guide to Legal Help and you say you want to get a divorce without children, you'll get this little advert. And so I'm putting this up here to show you that, but also if you want to just do it, if you want to learn more about it. You won't throw our numbers off, just finish, right? But if you want to check it out, this is probably a bad choice. I should have picked a short one, but I'll put a different one up in a minute that's a shorter one.
That's all right if you tested it after a few times and you can click stop and then it will stop. Will no longer text you.
Yeah, and we'll just know that like in January we can deduct like 20 people who bailed as being you guys.
The healthcare power of attorney one is pretty short and,
Okay.
and has less. Sometimes there's some day lags built in, like, oh, you didn't do that yet. We'll text you back next week. You know, when we tested it, we sped it up so that we didn't have to wait weeks in testing.
So hi, Luigi from Lone Star Legal Aid in Texas. We built out something similar to this for helping clients that we engage for brief services or advice and counsel. And so one of the things that was really helpful, addressing one of Angie's last questions about doing this in the context of a provider is that, we integrated this with LegalServe, and so we can now do demographic reports and try to find out how we can improve the mix of the people that we take for extended service and the people that, we anticipate might not be very good at doing this as a self-representing person going forward. And so we're hoping to hit a critical mass where we can start doing that work as well.
That's awesome. That would be such useful information to have. And another one of those like things that we all want but can't figure out how to get.
Hello. Thanks for sharing. This is super great to learn about. I was wondering if during some of your text flows, if some of the participants, instead of answering like A, B, C, or D, or yes or no, they had some more detailed responses, especially some of the topics like eviction can feel really urgent during that time, and most of the time it is. So I was just wondering what the response was to that, and if you looked at for any like qualitative analysis.
So one of the qualifications for building this was that it had to be fully automated. Again, like one of those, what we can do and what we can't do. We're like a team of 8. And so what happens when someone texts back something that is not, like if the answer is A, no, they can type A, they can type no, they can type N, and we will recognize all of those. If they type, I don't know what you're talking about, they get an automated response that says,
I think I'm sorry I do not understand your reply. Please reply with A to D or something like that.
Yeah, so we could look at that qualitative data. We haven't, just because we haven't done a ton of data analysis, but I think that is something that's a good idea to look at that. But the practical answer is what Wilson said.
Hi. So first, just from the FCC, there's a great letter from LSC, I think from last February, that lays out how and why legal aid groups can proactively text message. Like if you see in a court record that I'm going to be evicted, how you can legally text me without me giving prior consent. So that's really worthwhile to look at for that proactive outreach. On the texting, I was thinking about the giving something of value, and I wonder, there's two things that come to mind. One is if you can give court reminders or other kind of ticklers as a thing of value and branding it around that kind of thing that we know, at least from criminal justice, people highly engage with and actually does change their appearance rates and default rates a lot. So I wonder, I know that's another thing to put on your plate, but integrating with court systems and then being able to offer reminders and just-in-time prep for your court hearings, or whether your filing has been accepted or anything else you can get from the court record that then you are being a very informed coach to them. Or the second thing of value is like, do you want to get off this website and enter into text world? And we can give you the website content, but maybe this website is too much for you, just like go on text. And so you're not necessarily doing follow-up immediately, but you're doing some of the topic triage or other things that you're expecting them to do on the website. But basically you make the website as a text message thing, another thing to put on your list. The only other comment I had was for the eviction. Is there a way, if we know from some of the new eviction peer-to-peer navigator programs, in-person things we see in South Carolina and otherwise, that we see a lot of value of people just getting pure emotional support during the no-win SRL eviction process, is there a way that we could automate that peer-to-peer feeling of just saying, still go to your hearing, make sure you don't default, keep calling, like that emotional coaching to keep people, if we know that the main thing we need them to do is to show up or to be persistent and not drop out, if there's a way, even if you can't give legal information, to give the peer-to-peer support.
That's all great ideas and information, Margaret. Thank you so much. Oh, yeah, sorry. I was trying to be so good and I just got wrapped up in questions. Thank you so much, everyone. Please do the survey on Whova.
Thank you.